Hi everyone, it's been a minute and my tripod broke, so we'll see how long this video is since I'm holding it up with my hand. But today I want to talk about this idea called sacred site. And in essence, the Bible is proposing a very specific view. So you can imagine putting on a pair of glasses and it's changing the entire world that's in front of you when you put those glasses on. And this is essentially what happens when you start to apply concepts in the Bible. Now, if witnessing the biblical narrative is like putting on a pair of glasses, we really could just put them on and take them off, right? You don't have to commit and say you're a Christian just to explore and become curious about what the Bible has to say. And I, as a non-believer at one point, like I just turned back towards Christ about a year ago. And before that, I'd say I was anti-religious, anti-Christian even. And I had so many resistances to even considering what the Bible had to say or what it taught, simply because I saw a lot of hypocrisy. But it deterred me from even being curious about what the Bible said. And I feel like that was a disservice to me. So today I want to encourage you to just get curious and let's just try on a pair of biblical glasses, which we will call sacred sight. Now, what's interesting about the biblical narrative and like what is the main shift and change in our sight that happens? And the main change is that instead of leaning on my own understanding and decision making and personal will, we are encouraged to seek God's will and God's guidance. And so it's this practice of going to God and saying, okay, God, what do you want me to do in this situation? And this is a big misconception with non-believers. They think that there is more of a legalistic and dogmatic practice, right? Which is, I'm going to do these certain practices and then I am saved and I acquire the reward of going to heaven. And that is, I'd say, a misconception of what the Bible is offering. You know, the Bible is really saying, look, there's a creator and that creator wants an intimate relationship with you, and that creator made you for a very specific purpose. And the closer we get to our creator, the more clarity we have in what that purpose is for us. And a side effect or a consequence of that intimacy with our creator is that we change our behavior, our heart changes, the things we enjoy in life changes, and the things that we choose to focus on in life changes at its core. So rather than the behavior modification being a precursor to relationship with God, which then leads to the experience of eternal connection with God, it's actually you're seeking that eternal connection with God, and as a consequence, your behavior starts to change, and as a consequence of that, you get to be connected with God for eternity. Again, remember, if there's someone watching this that's like, oh, well, I don't agree with that. Okay, we're just trying on the glasses. Remember, we don't have to commit and say, oh yes, this is truth versus this is not true. Let's just get curious about the ideology and the perspective for a minute. So this is kind of interesting actually to then address like what challenges and resistances might come up when we start to look at this worldview, right? We're putting on the glasses. What resistances come up when we start to think, oh, I'm going to surrender my will to a creator? What resistances come up when we think, I'm going to release my own personal attachments of what I want to do and ask for insight from the very force that created me and created humans and everything around me? That's something we could spend time on reflecting, because ultimately that's what's going to cause some warps of perception, right? Those are the things that are immediately saying, calling us to say, this isn't true, right? Or this isn't going to work. This doesn't work for me. I don't agree with it. It's because we have resistances, right? So for me personally, I had a very hyper independent mentality. And this was just from attachment challenges that I had with my parents. And then also, like, I'd say series of traumas, relationship challenges cause this lack of dependence on other people and this really strong independence and mentality of, I can do it on my own. I got this. I don't need help, right? That's like hyper independence. So that narrative can generally block us from being open and receptive to not only getting insight from other people, but also this idea of like, hey, I'm going to get all my insight and direction from an entity and a force that I can't even see. That's really challenging. There's also resistances because of that, right? I can't see this force, and therefore, how can I trust it or rely on it? Now, the trippy thing about Christ and God and the biblical narrative is that it's not this, like, here's the answer, and then you know what to do forever for the rest of your life and you have security. It's a calling to have faith in God, seek that connection with God, and then it's like, okay, now what, God? Now what do you want me to do? And sometimes there's confusion because so many things happen that we don't understand. And so much of life can often feel like experiences are being inflicted or impressed onto us rather than us choosing it. So this is very true with suffering and external challenges. Yes, there are things we bring on in our own life that cause personal suffering, and that is unfortunate. But there are also things that happen to us. Consider children, right? Are they, yes, sometimes they do make choices that bring on personal suffering, but there are some really horrific things that happen to children and adults that are just immoral, And so how do we navigate some of that stuff? How do we make sense of it? And again, God is saying, just trust in me. Jesus is saying, just follow me. And you will experience peace even in the midst of that uncertainty and that lack of knowing. And that's a very incredible experience to have. Now, again, put on the glasses, or you can even take them off and look at the glasses and just recognize, why would anybody put these on and call themselves a Christian when ultimately Jesus is saying, look, you should follow me and I'm going to show you a new way. And it's really going to be out of your comfort zone. Not only that, people are going to persecute you, and you may even be rejected by your family and the people that you love most. But follow me and trust me, and I promise it's going to be okay. What person in their right mind would even consider that, right? Nobody who's logically thinking would experience that. But what happens is Jesus has a personal relationship that starts with his followers, and Jesus becomes manifested in one's life in a way that is so personal and so beyond logic that you can't help but question the supernatural placement of God and of Christ. And this is something to be mindful of if you're not a believer at this point in time, is that people aren't just saying, most of the time, people are not just saying, oh, this sounds good, I'm going to call myself a Christian and put these goggles on and look at life in this way. Most of the time, we have some sort of experience where we have the opportunity to just start seeing things differently, right? We acquire this perceptual shift in how we view things. And that is the putting on of the glasses in itself. It's not even reading the Bible. It's having some crazy experience of suffering and then Christ bringing you peace or contentment or guidance amidst all of that, that it's like, whoa, you just find yourself, you have these glasses on. And then you start reading the Bible and it's like, whoa, I see a lot of what this is saying. So becoming a believer is a very personal experience and process. Developing that sacred site can happen through Christ just coming into your life through certain situations and circumstances. And I do believe that there's an opportunity for people who are willing and open and curious to contemplate the reality of God and the reality of Christ's resurrection. There's a lot of resistances to those things conceptually, which is fascinating because the more you learn about science, the harder and harder it is to actually deny God. And then the more you start looking at the reality of Christ as a historical figure and the potential of the resurrection, it's mind-blowing. I highly recommend just looking at it because it completely changed my life. Like, it opened up my mind to even considering what the Bible had to say. So I highly recommend starting there if you're in this conceptual place, or if you're even a believer and maybe your faith isn't feeling as strong or is wavering, or you're really going through some challenges in your life, and you're calling out to God and saying, God, I just really need a sign to strengthen my faith. Look into the historical potential of the resurrection of Christ, and it's pretty incredible. So, and then you might get curious about reading the Bible more and looking at, like, okay, well, what does the Bible say then if this really potentially happened? So this is that idea of like sacred site. You want to observe what are the hitches that are coming up and blocking you potentially. What are you resistant to in doing that? And ultimately, as a follower of Christ, like, what you're called to do is, follow this higher standard of morality. An example is loving your enemies, forgiving people who have wronged you. Super difficult, super unnatural in many ways. You're called to do things like that. You're also called to constantly be in prayer to God, to glorify God, to worship God. And I think, when you look at it from like a psychology standpoint, there's cults and there are ill-intentioned religions that ask for that, except it's towards and projected onto a certain leader figure, right? And the Bible is kind of interesting because Jesus is the way, Jesus is the doorway, Jesus is the director, Jesus is the guide, ultimately. And I mean, we can get into this discussion of the Trinity, which is just a very in-depth mystery of the biblical narrative, which is that Jesus is one of the three embodiments or persons of God, right? So God is one, and then there's also the form of God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. And the best way I've had this explained to me is conceptualizing an egg, right? You have the egg shell, the egg white, and the egg yolk. It's all an egg all together. But there are three separate parts that make that egg an egg, right? But they're also separate: the egg yolk, the egg white, the egg shell. And this is very similar with the Trinity. It's the same situation. It's all God. It's just different forms of that singular God. Again, this is a biblical mystery. This is something you could spend a long, long time trying to understand more deeply and more fully. And it's worth praying to God for more insight on that. You don't have to have the full answer right now to call on God to bring more information to you that is going to impact you in a very personal way. That's just how that ideology and comparison of the Trinity resembling an egg really left a personal impression on me. That's the main reason I share it. But Jesus is this doorway, this guide, right, to understanding deeper intimate connection with God and the life that God intends for his creation, ultimately. And so that's something that's pretty amazing. So there is this worshiping and praising of Jesus, because without that direction, we would be lost. And then there's also this aspect of having a debt incurred for turning away from our Creator. This is an idea that a lot of people have resistance to. A lot of non-believers have a lot of resistance to this. So bear with me. Remember, we're just putting on the glasses. We're just observing. We're just becoming curious, okay? You don't have to buy into this stuff as truth right away, although I do believe it's truth. But we're just tasting it, trying on the glasses. So it's this idea that we're worshiping God, we're praising God. Yes, there's this praise towards Jesus for being that guide, but there's also praise towards Jesus because there's this debt we've incurred for turning away from God, the very Creator that made us. And this is kind of the idea of treason. You know, if you're within a society and you rebel against the very society that gives you all the opportunities and benefits that you've been enjoying, that's basically treason. Same thing has happened in our relationship with God as humans. We've turned against this very thing that gave us life and the ability to experience consciousness and live in this world, right? And have life. We've turned against that. And that has caused a debt. You see this in relationship psychology, right? If you have a relationship and you turn away from that person and you hurt them, wait for this plane to go by. Let's say you have a close friend in your life or person in your life and you hurt them, you can't expect that to just be ignored and brushed under the rug and everything returns to normal when you decide you want to have a connection with that person again. So that you have to repair. You know, you have to be able to take accountability of what you did wrong, what went wrong, what happened, and decide, okay, I want to do something new. I want to change. Let's maybe do this better. And I'm sorry, and I'm going to do something different, right? So we have to create that repair system ultimately. And according to the biblical narrative, Christ is that repair. He has come in and paid the debt for us. It's like having someone, hand you $1 million basically, and just saying, here, I'm just going to give this to you, and I know you haven't done anything to deserve it. As a matter of fact, you've hurt a lot of people and you're very selfish, but I'm going to give it to you anyways. And, all you get to do is experience the benefits of that. And that's literally our relationship with God through Christ, is being handed, here, you're going to have a relationship with the entire Creator of the entire world, who knows a perfect plan for your life and has a perfect intention for your life. All you have to do is just have a relationship with Him, and you get the benefits of it. Jesus is the one that made that possible. So there is this praise and worship for Jesus for that opportunity. But its origin is in God, right? The origin of that even being something we have the potential to engage in is because God chose to extend that opportunity out to us, right? So this is where you kind of got to be mindful of who you're worshiping and what are you worshiping them for. This gets brought up a lot in like Catholicism as well, because you're worshiping the Holy Spirit, or you're worshiping Mother Mary, or you're worshiping and praying to saints. So just be mindful of who you're praying to, who you're worshiping, and why. So yes, in other religions, you got to question it. In any religion, in any spiritual ideology, you got to look at what are you worshiping. Now, the challenge is, though, is that people who say they're anti-religious or don't associate with a religion, they still worship things. They still have faith in things. They just say it's not God and it's not supernatural. Most of the time, for example, atheists are putting their faith in science or money or time, right? And this is what they have their stored faith in. And that's, okay, but just recognize it's still faith. You know, you're still placing your hope and your focus on something, and you're worshiping that thing most of the time. You know, number one thing that's being worshipped in society today is pleasure. That is something people bend over backwards to worship. And the whole cultural narrative is that you deserve to worship this thing. You deserve your happiness. And that's, again, it's just this chasing of pleasure and avoidance of pain. And the biblical narrative is just about the opposite. It is the opposite. You know, it's you turn away from these worldly pleasures and these physical pleasures because there's something greater beyond that. And that is experience. That is something you can experience in your own life. That is not just something where it's like, here, agree with me on this and you will acquire X. You know, that's not how it works. It's not this conceptual thing. It's like you change your life, you become a different person, and you get to witness it firsthand. You know, there's a buy-in part, right, of commitment. And that's also a hard thing with the biblical narrative, and why people don't just put on the glasses is because you're committing. You have to commit to who you value, what you do, how you represent yourself, what you devote yourself to, right? And it's so much easier to devote ourselves to our own personal will, our own decision making, and money, and physical success and physical gain. All of that stuff is easy to commit to, but it doesn't have the fulfillment. It doesn't have the depth that as humans we spiritually crave. And you see this over and over and over again with people who are millionaires. Like, they're still challenged in some way. They're still chasing something. It's never enough. And a lot of people are like, oh, well, money, you know, can buy happiness. Or there's a lot of memes online that talk about, you know, well, money can't buy happiness. And then they're like, well, I was pretty happy in Greece. I was pretty happy in Italy. Yeah, I was pretty happy here and happy there. But it wasn't the money that brought that. It was the experience, right, that brought that sense of happiness and connectivity to culture and experiencing something new and diverse and fresh, right? And you get to see this whole other layer of life when you travel. You get to see how other people live, what other people value. So it's not the money still, it's the experience. And you can get those experiences without money. You can have really incredible life experiences and be dirt poor. So, you know, it's so interesting though how as humans, right, what do we have control over? We have control over money. I can decide to become a workaholic and burn myself out for the sake of money and have control over my sense of security. That's most of the time what we really, really want. We want some sense of security. But anyways, there's so many other things, right, underneath that drive that we put our faith into things, or that drives our faith in different things. So ask yourself, what are you putting faith in? Just put the glasses on. Just try to ask yourself about this biblical narrative. What if Jesus Christ really did rise from the dead? Just be curious about it and explore that, because it's a very incredible journey once you embark on it. Well, I hope you enjoyed this little chit chat about the idea of sacred site. Make sure to check out my other videos and follow me and subscribe and comment. Let me know if there's anything else that you specifically want to hear about. I hope you have a great day.